All right, welcome back to how to convert a Freewing T33 to a turbine. Lots happened since my last video. I ended up, I'm gonna sell the one that I was working on for a backup. So I'm gonna get that done this week and get it out of my hair. And then I'm gonna continue on another one. I wanna show you a couple things. This is the flying prototype. One thing we're going to do tonight is I noticed there's been an awful lot of fuselage flux in this area right here, and I think it's because we took out the inlet spike that used to be attached to the forward fuselage, and when the fuselage bends, this used to go in the bearing against the top wing skin. And since the fuel tank isn't glued in really, it's just kind of floating in there, it doesn't carry any load. So I made up just kind of a beef up right here that I'll show you how to make later tonight. It's a 3-ply fiberglass layup that's bonded to the wing. And in this area here, there's 3 screws that go into a little plywood puck that we'll talk about later. And why I'm looking at the original prototype, I want to show you back here just to center up the tailpipe. I just installed 4 little bitty balsa wood shims with a grain running vertical, just E6000 in it, and it pretty much just centers up the tailpipe and allows the tailpipe to float fore and aft depending on the heat range of the pipe. That's all we got to look at this one. So let's go to the one that we've been working with. There's been quite a bit of progress on it. Last week we've mounted, or just a few nights ago, we mounted the plywood rails. Since then, I took out the foam a little bit, got rid of the little humps that the EDF was set up for. I just brush coated that with some BBM heat shield just to kind of seal it up. I just keep the foam from flaking off. Got the engine mounted and the tailpipe mounted just with 6 number 4 sheet metal screws. The fuel line tubing's hooked up. The main cable underneath is hooked up. And there was a little trough down in, you can't see it now, but there's a trough down the middle that the rudder and elevator wires go through. They're still in there. I covered them up with a 30-second balsa wood shim and then brush coated some heat shield on that just to keep the wires from flopping down on the engine and tailpipe. So looking back here, the tailpipe's in. I don't have the balsa wood shims in here, but it's no big thing. You just slide in 4 shims and it centers up. So basically the tail of this model is done, except, you know, we are going to still mount the hatch here. I'm going to show you that on the next video. Before I flip it over, this is where the vents for the fuel tank. I just keep it covered at all times, keep junk out of it. So let me flip this thing over. There's been quite a bit of work up front here. I wanted to show you before it got really crowded. I'm delivering this model with no receiver in it. The owner is going to install the receiver. I'm just bundling up the wires and he can hook them up. Let's go through the fuel system here first. We'll start with the vent. Down in here, here's the vent that we saw on the other side. I just silver soldered a little piece of brass to it, screwed it down to the existing battery mount rails, and ran a piece of 6mm fuel line from the vent up to the vent on the main tank. You know, I like to safety wire everything in. That's just the habit that I'm in. It's probably not needed. And let's point through here now. And then the main clunk line on the main tank, it runs into one of the top fittings on the UAT. I just used a large Tygon tubing in this application because it curves quite a bit and this polyurethane tubing doesn't quite want to bend that flexible. And on the other line coming out of the UAT, that's the fill line here. I have a 6mm Festo with a plug right here. Very convenient. When you're done filling, you just put the plug back in and you stow it back in the model. So that takes care of these two lines, and the line coming out of the front of the UAT, that is going to go to the pump, which is going to mount up in here, and I'll do that on the next video and show you that. The batteries are mounted up front. They were supplied by the customer. He's running a 3-cell LiPo for the model. We'll talk about that in a minute. And a 3-cell life for the turbine. 3-cell life for the turbine's ideal. The 3-cell LiPo, let's talk about that for a minute. The servos and gear in this model are really meant to run on the electric ducted fan setup, and the speed controller for the electric ducted fan setup is regulating it down to about 5.5 volts. So what I do, and it's a must, you have to, depending on what battery you use, you need to regulate the voltage from your receiver battery that runs the servos and gear down to 5.6, 5.7. I do that with a little Castle BEC right here. I soldered on an end that hooks to the battery on the 3-cell life, and then this is going to plug it in the receiver and deliver the receiver that runs the servos and the gear 5.7 volts. It's very happy there. I've tried running it on 6.6 volts from a 2-cell life battery, and they're just not happy, especially the gear. They like, everything's designed around the 5.5 to 5.7 range. So this is a must, no matter what type of battery you're running. Unless you're running a 4-cell NiCad, but who's doing that anymore? And then talking about what else is inside the model here, I built a little shelf here. This is where I like to mount the receiver. He's not gonna run a gyro stabilized receiver, which is fine. But if you were gonna run a gyro stabilized receiver, it can mount here. Just make sure it's in there solid and is not gonna move. I think it's a good place to have the receiver. It's pretty much tucked up out of the way. You can stow the excess wires underneath it and get rid of some of the slack. Over here we have the, this is a Zycoy brake controller. And it's a little bit different. A Zycoy brake controller is really meant to run his brakes, okay? But they work fine with the JP brakes. The only thing you got to do is you got to take the 2 wires that are coming up for the JP brakes, and you need to solder on a regular servo connector, eliminating the middle wire, because he's just picking up power in the outboard terminals of the brake controller. These things work phenomenal. If you want to use the controller that comes with the JP brakes, you can, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to be highly disappointed because they're either on or off, and there is no in between. What's nice about the Zycoy brake controller is you can set it up and it pulses like anti-lock brakes where they do not lock up. I mean, and you can program in 5 different settings. It's a phenomenal piece of engineering right here. It's not that expensive, and it's really simple. And this wire right here plugs into the receiver for whatever switch that you're running the brakes on. These 2 wires here are coming from the brakes. This wire right here is how you power it. I like to power mine from the 3-cell life battery that's running the turbine. I just hook it onto the balance lead and it's fine. I don't want to hardwire it. My personal preference is I don't want to hardwire it into the battery, because if I want to take the battery out, I don't want to be monkeying with this. So when I'm ready to fly for the day, I just plug this into the balance lead and I just leave it plugged in until I'm done for the day. I do recommend unplugging it when you're done. And then this is just gonna, once you get this set up with the switch, His instructions are very clear online how to do that. That's just going to get stowed up underneath here. You're really not ever going to have to get to it anymore. You can adjust the travel volume on your radio to adjust the brakes more or less. Let me see here what else is on my list. Oh, and why I'm thinking about it. Last video we were cutting these slots for the turbine mounts, and I accidentally said to use a 5/32 piece of music wire. It's not a piece of 5/32, it's a piece of 5/64. You want it a little bit undersized so that when it does start in and melt the foam, it kind of melts a little bit on top and bottom. And being undersized from your 1/8 inch slot, it makes the slots just right. So 5/64, not a 5/32. Okay. This is going pretty quick here. So let me talk to you about this. Let me flip this thing over again and I'll show you the structural reinforcement we're going to do here to the fuselage. It hasn't given me any issues. It's just that if you pull like a really hard outside loop, what's going to happen is that the fuselage is flexing right here. See how the gap opens up? Okay, and if you land hard on the nose gear, you take a chance of breaking the fuselage because all the load right now is on the center line here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a layup on here, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Let's go over here. Once again, this is the owner supplied engine. I mean, he bought everything over that's going to go in here, so this thing's going to go away, and I'm just going to start on another backup. But the wing is pretty much, it's screwed down. There's really no reason to ever have to take the wing off again unless you got to get to the tank, because to purge the engine on initial start, you can easily come back here, take the fuel line off, hook it up into another can, and purge it. So it works out really well. The engine will come in and out very simply. You might have to take the tailpipe loose, slide it aft, undo these 4 screws, and the engine will come right out. So, you know, you can take the wing on and off, but you gotta have to disconnect the wires from the receiver and fish the slap too. And I prefer to just leave the wing alone. So this morning here, I made up a. That's one thing. Freewing, it's not perfect. They'll got a little bit of a mismatch here. It's no big deal. It's not forward facing. So I made a layup here that's going to be used on this model here. And the way this is going to work is this is going to get trimmed down to about 2 inches by 6 inches. We're going to remove the paint in this area here, bond the layup down with E6000. And in this area right here, we're going to insert 4 of these little plywood pucks. I just got 2 right here. There's going to be 2 here, 2 here. We're going to router them in, and then we're going to install 4 screws through the fiberglass layup into the plywood, and that keeps the fuselage from flexing. I did it on this model over here. It seems to be holding real well. I flew it yesterday. It's fine. As you can see, when I pick up this model here, there is no flexing in this joint here anymore. So the fiberglass layup is carrying the load. And if you ever do want to pull the wing, all you're going to have to do is pop these 4 screws here and the 4 screws to mount the wing, and it's just going to pop right off. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to show you how to do the layup to make this. It's real simple. It conforms perfectly. I mean, you know, it's perfect. So, you know, this will get trimmed down a little bit, and so let's go and do the layup here. It's real similar to the techniques that we used to make the hold down to the tank. I drew the outline of the part that I want on a piece of it's probably 3 mil plastic, and we're going to do a 3-ply layup here. It's the same fiberglass. I call it 4 ounce. It's really 3.8 I think it's like 3.6. The number is 1522. The layup schedule is going to be a 45, a 090, and a 45. So let me mix up some epoxy and we'll get this going. Once again, you can use the wet system, finishing resin, whatever your heart desires. So I'm just going to mix up, I'm going to shoot for 7.5. 7.6, good enough. Then we'll shoot for 1.5, which will give me my 5-to-1 ratio. Okay. Good enough. All right. Gonna clip our stick. I always clip the sticks because the roundness of the stick doesn't mix the epoxy very well in the corners. In the next video we do, which it may be the last one, I don't know, it may not. I'll show you pretty much the finished model ready for delivery. And I'm gonna, some people have always asked about where do you get some of the stuff like the UAT and all that. We're going to talk about that and what is basically is going to be coming with my tank and pipe kit. I'm going to include some accessories. Unfortunately, the price has gone up a little bit from the guys that ordered the first batch. You know, I work for more than a grain of rice a day. So, okay, so I'm going to do a, this is 45. Get that wetted out here. So I really don't want to get into the business of selling all the accessories. I'm just going to pretty much point everybody in the right direction on where to go. The only thing I really want to sell is the tank and the pipe, and then I'm going to include some like fiberglass cloth and some plywood, and I'm going to give you a piece of the 5/64 music wire to cut the slots. I'm going to include some that 6mm polyurethane tubing. A few other little nickel dime items, and we'll talk about that on the next video. So I've got the third ply going down. You know, the thing's been flying fine without the reinforcement, but you know, it's just a matter of time. Last thing you want is to pull some hard G's in the air and have the nose rip off, or you know, or break something on a hard landing. But it's been flying great. All right, got 3 plies down. We're gonna squeegee out the excess resin. All right, that looks good. I'm gonna trim it up. Once again, this is just a rough shape. It's gonna get trimmed down. All right, put some gloves on. We're going to pick up 1 layer of plastic. Yeah. Now what I got over here, got a very thin layer. It's like painter's plastic. 3M makes it just to hang from your walls to kind of keep the dust down, but it's very, very thin. It's probably a ½ mil thick, and it works really good. So I'm just gonna set this right in the middle of that. And then I'm gonna pull this plastic here. And then this is gonna keep everything from sticking to the model and conforming. So I'm done with the gloves. Now here's a little trick here. We're gonna come over here, and this is the area that I want to do. I want about 1 inch of fiberglass on this side of the seam, inch on that. I'm just gonna mist it with water. And what that's gonna do is gonna create like a hydraulic lock to keep the plastic stuck down. So I'm just gonna pick this up. Try to get the wrinkles out of it. You know, doing it this way, you're not going to screw up the paint or anything. So the plastic's sticking really good because of the water. Grab a brush. Okay, you know, it's gonna even get in that mismatch a little bit. Slide it this way a little bit. So that's about all I got for tonight. Next video, everything should be in. We'll be mounting the pump, the little junction board for the X45, which is the light version. And everything will be pretty much hooked up except the receiver. I'll have both batteries in it. It would be up to the purchaser to final CG the thing, hook up his flight controls and all that simple stuff. Okay, until next time, it'll probably be a day or two. Might be the last one. All right, thanks. Bye.